All for coming. And I'm sure quite a few of you would think, oh, nurse, okay? Nurse Klug.
Bern-Klug, yeah.
Who is a sociologist.
Social worker.
University of Iowa. And she finally came to give us that perspective on spirituality and aging. So without further ado, nurse, we'll let you have it.
Thank you.
One thing, if you do have questions or want to make comments, please speak up because we're not. She's the one who's mic'd. Okay? Go shout in her chest.
Uh-oh. Thank you for the invitation, and I want to thank Lori Erickson as well for the invitation, and thank you for being here today. I know you've had a busy day already, but I want to start out with a question to you. What is Spirit School, and why are you here?
It's our version of adult education.
Okay, all right, okay, very good. This building is very important to me. I am a member of the Full Circle faith community, and you allowed us to use this space while we were just starting out, and I'm very grateful to you for that. This is where my mother's funeral was held, right in this room. And this is where my daughter was confirmed. So this is sacred ground for me, and I appreciate your community and all that you are doing for our larger community as well. I have personally benefited from these connections. So I wanted to start out with that. As Bob said, I'm with the University of Iowa. I'm a social work professor. I'm starting my 20th year here. This was my first job after getting my PhD. I'm a late bloomer. So I had a 3-generation move. I was looking for a place that had good public schools and a place that had good senior services. And I'm originally from Sioux City, and I had gone to school here myself, and so I knew what Iowa City had to offer and talked my Milwaukee husband into moving to Iowa. So 20 years ago that happened. So, and I've just come off a 3-year term of being director of the School of Social Work, and I'm going back to being a research faculty member, and that's my love, is conducting research. But I'll make a little disclosure right now. Although I study gerontology, I have not focused on spirituality. And so I'm hoping that you're going to help me create our time together this afternoon because I'm comfortable with the gerontological stuff. I've read up a little bit on the spirituality things. In fact, one of the members of my dissertation committee wrote the book on spirituality and social work, Ed Kanda. And he was also a University of Iowa professor before he moved to the University of Kansas. So we've been going around a little bit like that. I put some notes on here just to keep me focused and make it easier, hopefully, for people to say. When we're talking about spirituality, one of the aspects is struggling with, well, why am I here? And so those are 2 levels. You already kind of answered why you're here today, because you're part of this group, and you're discussing this as part of your adult education. But what would you say is your, not the purpose of life, but your life purpose? Would anybody, and you don't have to have the one life purpose, but how about a purpose of your life?
Memorize everything Jesus said out of the Bible.
Okay.
Of course, yeah.
Memorizing what Jesus said, all right.
I guess I was a nurse for 50 years, and I have to say I really like to help people.
Yeah. So a purpose of life is to help each other, help people, all right. Anybody else?
One of my purposes these days is to celebrate beauty. And I do that through photography mainly.
Okay, celebrating beauty through photography or other ways. All right, because as we have this conversation related to aging and spirituality, we're going to be thinking about our purpose also. That's part of what's behind this time Okay, push those out. All right, so I'm going to start out by talking about aging and then go into gerontology. But if you look in one of the classic biology books on the biology of aging, this is the definition of aging. Time-related deterioration of the physiological functions necessary for survival and fertility.
That's depressing.
That's depressing. Yeah, that's depressing. Indeed it is. So biologically, this is how we perceive aging. It's kind of infiltrated our culture in general, that aging is not a good thing. Aging is a sign of deterioration. I found it really interesting. We all think about survival, but fertility and the relationship between aging and fertility, it varies by species a lot. And that's what is kind of being unpacked right now among biologists in aging is, well, one of the questions, what's the purpose of living beyond fertility? That question's been around for a while. That's a philosophical as well as a biological question. But in many species, they die right after they reproduce, and other species don't. So what's about that variation? What can we learn from that? Aging does affect all, aging is different from disease, okay? Sometimes we talk about aging as disease. It's not. Aging is the process that happens to everybody in our species as we have more time. And disease doesn't happen to everybody. So we may all accumulate years, but we don't all get thyroid disease, or we don't all get arthritis. So the diseases are separate from the aging. But in part because of the strong influence of medicine, which is a good thing, we see aging, we have come to see aging as a decline and as deficit because we've medicalized this part of our lifespan. Yeah.
Also because we have such a youth worshiping.
Yes, we do. We have a very youth worshiping society.
So do you think that's beginning to change?
Not much. No, I really don't. I think we're getting, I'm hoping we're working on broadening our sense of the possibilities in older adulthood. That's a step in the right direction. But, still most of the advertising is toward younger people. In our lifetime, it was almost all toward young people till 20 years ago, maybe. Do you remember seeing the first gray-haired woman in a woman's magazine? It's not that long ago.
And the Medicare advertising.
Well, Medicare advertising aside, you're right. Yeah.
I would also want to talk about, maybe you'll get to this, maturation and gaining of wisdom.
Yeah.
There's the whole, if it's a bell curve, which is probably not, there's a long time when we're gaining in maturity.
Yes.
Hopefully wisdom and other things that go along with it.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. We'll touch on it. Yes. All right, so this is again from the biological perspective. This is the biological functions of aging, and some call it gerontology or geriatrics, the science of declining lines. And so I drew this. It's not exactly right, but it's been published. They had the real data, but this is cellular function, kidney blood flow, maximum breathing capacity, nerve conductivity, heart output, and they all go down from young adulthood to older adulthood. So we, as a society, have also been impacted by this thinking that aging is, quote unquote, going downhill. If we stick to just thinking of humans as biological, then that that's the case, but I'm going to make the case, of course, that we're not just biological. But I do want to clarify these two concepts before I continue. Lifespan and life expectancy are concepts that have been used interchangeably. They're not. They're not interchangeably. Lifespan, this is an abbreviation. It's usually the term is maximum lifespan. And lifespan is the idea of how long can any person and that or animal live. What's the maximum potential life? So the lifespan for humans is about 121, 122 years, we think. But people don't live that long for the most part. It's what we think is possible. Okay, life expectation is different. Life expectation is the average number of years that people who are all born in the same year live. So it's the age at which about half the people who were born, let's talk about 1900, people born in 1900. At what would be the age that about half the people born in 1900 have died and half are still alive? That's your life expectation. That's a group measure. And so although life expectation has greatly increased and greatly improved, especially over the last century, lifespan hasn't changed. People still live, the possibility of living beyond 121 years does not exist at this time. But our life expectancy has improved. At the turn of the 20th century, in the 1900s, the life expectancy in the United States was 47 years. That does not mean that people died at 47. Again, it's the average. And back in 1900, we had a lot of infant mortality, and that brought down the average. So if somebody made it past those first critical 5 months and then 5 years, then they had a pretty good run. I mean, back then we still had plenty of people working in agriculture, so there were a lot of injuries that related to death, and that was before antibiotics. But the reason a large part of the success in increasing life expectation over the 20th century was the decline in infant mortality. We do have people living longer, more people living longer. We haven't changed our lifespan, but we have more people reaching old age and more people living in old age, and the variety of functional health has really increased too. So if you know one 80-year-old, you know one 80-year-old. You can't really compare. With each day, we become more differentiated than other people we were born in the same cohort with. So all mammals age, most plants age, most living things age, and age is then in this way considered an accumulation of damage to an organism. From a biological perspective. Although they have found some marine animals that they don't think age. And one is the hydra that lives in fresh water, and even after 14 centuries of living, half of the hydra are still alive. So, and this is a big area of research in gerobiology, is can we tinker with that, how long we can live, our maximum lifespan. The philosophers are wondering, should we even go down there? But the biologists want to try. So I don't know what's going to happen in the next couple of years.
People are living less long now.
Well, COVID has changed things a lot. Most of the people who died in COVID were older adults. And so our life expectancy as a group has gone down because of COVID. And then when a country experiences war or terrorism, that's going to bring your life expectancy down because, again, it's a group measure. But we're more than biology, as you were mentioning. We're emotional beings, we're social beings, and we're spiritual beings. The emotional being part has had some real exciting news by Laura Carstensen and her team at Stanford University. And what she they have done is looked at emotional well-being throughout the life course. And what they have concluded is that your well-being, emotional well-being improves with age. That after young adulthood, people report better well-being all the way through older adulthood. Now, what does that mean? Why is that? A lot of people are working on that right now, and there are different thoughts about that. Well, that, you know, some people do say, well, the life expectation, the expectations of what we want from you as a society have changed. That may be part of it, but there's other ways of thinking about it too. All right, I'm going to read this quote. All right, this is from Laura Carstensen. People become increasingly motivated to pursue emotionally meaningful goals and thus invest psychological and social resources to optimize emotional well-being. That was one of the hypotheses, that it's as we realize that time is limited, and we realize it in a real concrete way because our bodies are changing, our functional capacities changing, we see friends and neighbors pass on, that we get a lot more selective on whether or not we're going to go to that committee meeting, whether or not we're going to join that group, whether or not we want to have Thanksgiving with those people. And we're very careful, we become more selective to maximize emotional well-being. That's her theory. Yeah, Bob.
One of the things that's happening that I read about and have experienced, I retired for Trail, Johnson County, is that there's increased loneliness among senior citizens. Okay, you know, the loneliness has physiological effects, and this is profound loneliness, and the percentage of older people that are experiencing loneliness is going up. So emotional well-being, yes, for some of us.
Yes. The rates, the way we measure loneliness is improving. There are pockets of people who are very lonely in older adulthood, but that's not the most lonely age group in our society. And then it's also kind of cultural, and it's also, I mean, by virtue, you said you were doing the Meals on Wheels? No, you're doing trails. Yeah, but like people who are doing Meals on Wheels, you're seeing people who, they're getting Meals on Wheels because they can't leave easily. So that's part of the sub thing. But yeah, some people are extremely lonely. Loneliness and isolation are two different things. Helen Lopata, a sociologist many decades ago, said the loneliest people on earth are, at least in the United States, she's from Chicago, the loneliest people in the US in her studies were people who were unhappily married. Because they're paired up, but it wasn't socially acceptable to look for other sources of emotional support. So living alone does not make you lonely, and living with somebody does not make you unlonely. It's the art of solitude, in part, and then expectations, and then what's available. Yeah, Jim, you had your hand up?
When I looked at that thing on the floor there, I wondered if that statement up there is correlated with suicide rates, which tend to decline as people get older. Is that correct?
The highest rates of suicide in the United States are white men over the age of 65. And do you have any ideas? I mean, we're not exactly sure why, but why might you think that that would be the group? Yes?
Some people feel they don't want to be a burden to their family. Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I think there are a lot of people who don't want to be a burden to their family, and so they offer themselves.
And do you think white men are more likely to not want to be a burden than black women or white women?
I would think so. I would think
What do
so.
okay, that's one hypothesis. What do other people think?
There's a book that came out a couple of years ago called Deaths of their death rates have skyrocketed in the last 20 years. Suicide, drug addiction, alcoholism, and I think that's a social result of the changes in our economy.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's probably something to that too also, yeah.
I would say a lot of older white men I know outsource their social life to their wives, and if their wives aren't around, they don't know how to socialize, and I think that's part of it. And the other thing is, I think in some segments of society, possibly the lower income, it's a very much an honor culture where it is forbidden for men to be weak and ask for help and admit loneliness and that sort of thing. So I think that contributes to it too. Or disability, yeah. So.
I also think a lot of men have found their identity in their work, and when they've retired or let go of that, both their social circle and their sense of self disappears.
I think that part of this is about the fact that men do not form the same kinds of bonds. They're not encouraged to form the same kinds of bonds that women do with other women. But that's thought of as kind of a sign of weakness, perhaps. But I think also there is probably something medical here. The way in which white men probably avoid going to doctors more than any other group.
Could be that, yes. Also, if you have never been a caregiver and you are finding that you're now caring for your 75-year-old wife with dementia, you may not have those skills. You may never have been the primary caregiver for anybody in your life other than yourself. So, and that can be very frustrating because it can be a feeling of a loss of agency. That when somebody asks you the same question 50 times in a day, you're trying to figure out what is dementia, what is aging, what is my role, how do I keep all this together? All the reasons that you mentioned are culturally embedded, and they're all things that we can address. We can address as an individual to a certain extent, especially as a group, and certainly as a nation. We could be putting emphasis on looking at these causes and trying to, reimagine what older adulthood might look like. Oh yeah, sure.
I think the long-term sociological trend is atomization. Okay, the kids move away, they're away, and the clan hardly exists for most people. Lori saw this recently in the Amanas, or the Amish, where they had a funeral and hundreds of people showed up. Oh, yeah. Okay, some people came from miles away at great expense, and so I think it's really important to, not just lay it on men. I think it's because of that. But it's something I think this group, what we should be working on as we think about spiritual aging is, okay, no longer do we have a small-scale society where it's automatic that you become an elder, okay, because you're old and you're passing on knowledge. There's Dr. Google, he's got the knowledge, all right? Yeah. So what role can we play in this context of increasing loneliness and alienation and so on? I think that's one of the key questions that we should be dealing with.
I don't want to in any way imply that there's something wrong with older white men. Because the older white men live in a cultural context that is made by all of us and maintained by all of us. So we need to be more deliberate about how we set up the social environment as well as the physical environment. Okay. Last week you had Leah Buck here, and I really liked her definition of spirituality I hope I brought it because I didn't have time to write it all out. But I thought it was a very good definition. Did I write it out? No. That most human experience that seeks to transcend self, I do think I wrote that out. For some reason, no, okay. That most human experience that seeks to transcend self and find meaning and purpose through connection with others, nature, and or a supreme being, which may or may not involve religious structures or traditions. So one of the key points that she makes in her article is the difference between religiosity and spirituality in terms of concepts. That they can go hand in hand, but they also are separate concepts. What really sticks out to me is this transcendence through connection beyond the self. That something about recognizing the worth and value and beauty beyond just ourselves is grounding and is important, and I believe should really be nurtured. So what are ways that you transcend yourself through connections, or that you've heard of? I don't want to, you may or may not have done this directly yourself, but what are some examples of transcendence beyond your own self?
Since I'm the one wearing the collar, I would say through worship and faith connections.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Who else?
Merce, your first question was, how is it that we evolved to have old people? And so I can imagine some ape way back when having a genetic predisposition to living an extra long time, which allowed her, it almost always would be a her, to be an elder that would then have a connection beyond herself to her grandchildren. Don't eat that damn rubber plant. That's bad for you. And connecting with the parents. And that would promote the reproduction of her yes. children, and it would spread through the whole species. And so the connection that comes to me most directly is grandkids.
Yeah. And John, there is something called the grandmother theory, that's the purpose of life beyond fertility for women, and that's why men continue to remain fertile and women don't in our species, is because of the extra caregiving capacity that the women would bring to the unit, and that makes that group more likely to be successful evolutionarily. Not just the individual, but the group. So it's matching the environment with the group's needs and benefits.
And for some of us, the group extends the creatures, the wild creatures and the plants and nature, and being part of that community as well, for me personally, is very grounding and positive.
I'm wondering if I put anything else there. I didn't, but I do have a few other notes. Yeah, Jim, go ahead, please.
Yeah, last night, Cindy and I watched an interesting show on television. It was just a 30-minute show about some people in Marin County, California, who were engaged in a photography class and learned to photograph nature and to see it through the eyes of a camera lens. And then to share that with people else other than themselves in a showing or an exhibit. And somehow there is the ability, this transcendence that connects us with others beyond self can happen through art. And if you learn how to make art or to see art, that takes a little bit of time, but it allows a kind of transcendence to take place.
That's a really good point.
That's an interesting aspect of art that I never had seen before, that it has that function.
We see that in social work, working with young children who may have experienced some kind of trauma. They don't have the words yet necessarily, they don't have the language, but they can draw. And then they can talk about their drawing with the questions coming from the therapist or from the trained counselor or whatever. But they couldn't create that yet. They don't have the maturity to do that.
Just before we started here, actually going back to announcement time, maybe before you came, there are announcements about all of these wonderful programs that we can plug into in various ways, Open Heartland and whatever. And I'm sitting there thinking, God, I would love to be a part of that. I used to be central to things like that. Now I can't be, because I can't drive.
Yeah.
I don't have enough central vision to do much shopping. And Chris Kellerman and I were just talking downstairs before we came about how you transition from one kind of activism to another to stay outside of yourself. Mm-hmm. And whether that is donating money for other people to go out and buy gifts and whatnot, whether it is making phone calls for a worthy cause to bring people together or raise funds. But I think an important part of aging for me, staying outside of myself, is just making that constant transition from what I know I can't do, and instead of stopping there, going right on into thinking, what can I do?
Yes. Adaptation throughout those skills are so important throughout life. And that's why sometimes when I see parents that hover a lot, I internally shudder, because we need to make mistakes and we need to learn from mistakes. And when we overprotect people, we sometimes prevent them from learning real important lessons. So one is the ability and willingness to continue adapting to the circumstances. And you just gave a lovely example of that.
I was thinking about that too, and I was thinking about presence and attentiveness. My grandmother raised 11 children, and then so she had to be very active and do a lot all the time, but she lived to be into her 90s, and by then she pretty much had to sit still in one spot. But she divided her time amongst all her children. She would spend 6 weeks with one child, 6 weeks with another, and this is a grandmother thing, but could be in other instances too. It wasn't like she did a lot when she was there, but the kids came home from school and maybe the parents were working or the parents were fixing dinner, and they could tell her, the kids could tell her about their day, or she would play anagrams with them. Or she would make sure that she was taken to their events. And so it was still a kind of activism, but it was very much just being present. And it's hard, though, to switch to that when you've been the one who does the taking grandma places and being in charge of committees and things like that.
Attention is the most important gift we give each other, I think. Peg, do you have something?
I'm just going to say that I volunteer at the food pantry, and as a nurse, when you're taking care of patients, you're kind of in charge of what's happening. But at the food pantry, many of our folks speak Spanish, and I just love it when one of the little children comes and interprets for me. I'm standing there, I know nothing, but I'm telling them how to tell their mom or dad to fill out these forms. And it's just, I just love it. I'm not the one in charge.
Yeah.
And I just, it means a lot. I love it.
That's good. Yeah. John, you got me thinking about something too, about the whole concept of adaptation and looking for what you can still do. And it reminds me of part of that poem by Longfellow. Something remains for us to do or dare. Even the oldest tree some fruit may bear. For age is opportunity no less than youth itself, though in another dress. And as the evening twilight fades away, the sky is filled with stars, invisible by day. I was reminded of that when you were talking about these adaptations and finding new ways and different ways to remain concerned about something beyond ourselves. And that's good for the society, and it's good for us to get a little break from ourselves. I brought this butterfly with me because it is around the time of Day of the Dead, and All Saints Day, All Souls Day. I'm half Mexican and half Irish. And yeah, I get that response. I was just down in Mexico not too long ago in Oaxaca, and they were all getting ready for Day of the Dead with marigolds everywhere and special bread for Day of the Dead. And it also coincides with the time that the monarchs from North America migrate to central Mexico in the Oyamel fir trees, and they winter there. And pre-colonial, pre-conquest times, the meaning of the indigenous people was it was the return of their loved ones. And the Day of the Dead is also about leaving a place in our heart for people who have passed, and they come back for one day, and that's why people have their favorite drink, their favorite food, and the Day of the Dead bread is sweet to try to coax the souls of people to come back for one day. They're not forgotten. And I think that when you live in a culture where you fear you're going to be forgotten when you die, it's a different kind of a burden than if you're part of a culture where you believe that there will be symbols of your continuity in some kind of a form, and you remain meaningful in some kind of a form. So I also brought this. This is a copy of the Labyrinth at Chartres Cathedral. Labyrinths predate Christianity by thousands of years, but have been taken up by many groups, including Christians. And of the 80 or so cathedrals that were built during the Middle Ages in Europe, 22 of those 80 had a labyrinth inside the cathedral. And today, the only one that remains is in Chartres. That's the only one that remains in the nave as they originally were. And my daughter and I went to Chartres in September with some friends, and we sprinkled the cremated remains of my husband, who passed away in March, along a replica of the labyrinth, because we can't do it inside the church, but there was a place that had a replica of the Chartres labyrinth right there in Chartres. And that was really meaningful and a sense of connection, because the whole purpose of the labyrinth is to stay the path in the journey of life, and to don't get upset if you think, I've already been up through here. No, that's okay. You get the same lesson thrown at you a couple times sometime. And as other people are on the labyrinth as well, you may encounter them, and they're at a different part of their journey. And so just remaining open to what we can do to recognize the humanity in each other throughout the lifespan. The meditation of walking the labyrinth can do that. The Chart Labyrinth is also unique because it has a much larger central area than most labyrinths. And there's one tiny circle for each day of creation. And it's kind of to remind us every morning we have a chance, if we're fortunate, to recreate our life and create something better for someone beyond ourselves. So I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I'm available, or if there's other things that people want to talk about or questions that you'd like to bring up, let's open it up for that.
Thank you for ending on a hopeful note.
Part of the hopefulness in the initial thing was we can't get pregnant any further.
And thank you for bringing that up. I love the labyrinth. Not all who wander are lost.
Yes.
But that brings up another thing. One of the things that's kind of hanging over me as I age is that all the statistics are that your travel just drops off the table at age 80. Just that's the number. And so I got a lot of places I got to see, including Chart. But what do I do when I get to 80?
Briefly, I wanted to respond to that. I don't know if you knew Karl Klaus, a member of the university faculty and member of the community, wrote a book that came out last year, shortly before he died. And of course, I'm completely blanking the title of the book, but the subtitle is about life in the 80s. He chronicled his 80s. Absolutely. Sorry, I'll think of the name.
I spent the first part of my career in nursing homes, interviewing families and residents and staff, and I just really grew to appreciate the enormous amount of emotional labor that you can identify in nursing homes. And when the direct care staff provide that, what a difference it makes. I remember going in to visit a woman who the staff told me did not have many visitors. And so I said, well, I'm done collecting my data. I'm here anyway. I'll just go talk with her. And I introduced myself and I talked with her and said, kind of what are you doing? And she said, I'm working on my relationship with God. And I'm working on it 6 hours a day. And I'm thinking about what I have learned in the past, and I'm sorting through what I believe and I don't believe, and I am in communication with my maker. I'm busy.
So come back later.
No, she was very gracious. And then another woman who was in the study, her daughter visited her every day. And her son called once a week. And one of the routine questions was about loneliness. And she had more visitors than anybody else, and she reported the highest level of loneliness. She wasn't lonely for anybody. She was lonely for her husband. And, can't bring him back. So, yeah.
But speaking of nursing homes, why do you think that men typically live for maybe 2 years in nursing homes and women live 5 or 6?
Well, there's a differential in life expectation based on gender anyway. And so if a lot of men are able to stay home because they have a wife. Yeah. And then when they die, the wife is more likely to need nursing home care because there isn't anybody there necessarily to care for her. So part of it is that they go in older, and they also have a shorter life expectancy. But I did meet a man. All these data were collected in Kansas City. I did meet a man. I'd ask him about life satisfaction. That was part of our study, and he liked living there. And I mean, I didn't hear that a whole lot. I did hear it from a couple men. And this man told me that he was one of 5 sons, and he was a firefighter. And for the first time in his life, he was surrounded by women. And that was good. So he liked being in a nursing home. The other guy who reported, he complained about so many things, and then I would ask him to rate his satisfaction, and it was high. And so I said, you know, help me make sense of this discrepancy. And he said, well, you know, every place can always get better. And you know that before I came here, I was living at home alone, and I had broken my hip, and I'd gone to the hospital, and I had recovered, and then I came home on the ambulance, and when the ambulance people were trying to get me in, I wanted them to get the heck out of the house because I had to go to the bathroom so bad, so I shooed them away, went into my bathroom. The floor had rotted under the stool because of a leak, and he fell through the floor and was stuck up to his hips for 3 days until what he had considered his nosy neighbor, but didn't call her nosy after that, came over because she had seen the ambulance come and drop him off, but she didn't see him turn on his kitchen light. So she came over and got him to the hospital. He had to get his hip fixed again, and then he went to the nursing home. And so he said, I don't care how long I have to wait, I'll never have to wait 3 days again. And, you know, so the whole thing about how do we frame what's happening to us? How do we choose to perceive our level of control and our impact on other people and, you know, what's good? So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking what I said about presence. You don't have to be a grandmother to be present.
Yeah.
But I have relatives in nursing homes, so I go fairly frequently. And there are, generally I've noticed, 1 or 2 people sitting in the hallway being very cheerful and greeting everybody who comes in and talking to the other residents and just kind of being there, being present for the other people that are there. So you don't have to be in a household with grandkids to be present to whoever's there.
Very good point. Very good point, yes. And it is a gift to have somebody listen to you, especially if you're in a situation where you really need to talk or get something off your chest or figure something out, to have somebody just listen, not give advice, not judge, just witness that with you can be so healing. And I think that's also part of spirituality, is healing our world and healing ourselves by recognizing these connections among us and taking the opportunity to appreciate beauty, make beauty, and see the inherent dignity in every human being.
Marissa, I think we've kind of used
Okay.
your time well, and thank you so much.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.